If you want to publish a book, but you feel stuck, out of time, and you don't know what to do next, then it's time to finish the damn book. Here's your host, Susie Schaefer.
Welcome to this episode of Finish the Damn Book. I'm your host, Susie Schaefer. My guest today is Jennifer Reiser, a dynamic creative leader known for her innovative approach to leadership development, network building, and organizational strategy. She blends analytical expertise with a visionary mindset to inspire change and is nationally recognized expert in leadership, workforce development, and change management. Jennifer brings a fresh perspective to problem solving and system design. As an author and speaker, she channeled her creativity into Leading in Color, Leadership Lessons from the Animal World, a series of workbooks that explore the intersection of nature and leadership. Passionate about unlocking potential, she helps individuals, teams, and organizations reimagine possibilities, embrace new ideas, and build sustainable success. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks, Susie.
It's so good to have you here. And I'm like so excited about the whole idea behind doing these leadership activity books and just what's happened since then. So since you've written and published those two amazing leadership coloring books, what has been specifically frustrating or emotionally challenging for you during this process? I know the books have been out a while, but it's given you probably some time to really think about where were the challenges for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. For me, it's much more about the process than the product. And when I used to lead teams, I would say, if the outcome is awesome, but the getting there stunk, what was the point, right? And so I think looking back on some of it, I understand that I am the kind of person who really likes order and structure. And I've spent years and years, decades actually, in operations and helping teams on the structural and functional side of things. But this gave me an opportunity to really lean into the creative side of things. I had to let go of the idea of it being perfect, even when we proofread and got things out, and then suddenly months later I find a word that's not supposed to be that word, and it's an actual word but it's a mistake, and it just like probably at one time in my life would have like sent me into a meltdown. And in this case I was like, hey, there's something wrong on this page. So it was an exercise in both embracing myself, both the structure and the creative side, trying to balance those, but also the letting go of the perfection kind of mindset.
Yes, as a recovering perfectionist myself,
Yep.
it's very hard because you want it to be perfect. And yet, no book is absolutely perfect. Even if you look at some of the traditionally published books with, big celebrity names on them, that you're going to find a mistake or two. It just is kind of the way it is. It's because we're human. But really, it takes a little bit to, get past that.
It does. I think the other piece that comes to mind in thinking through the process was accepting help. That was challenging for me at first. Fully believing in other people's positive intent was challenging. And to just be able to welcome that, embrace that, and set the boundaries with those who maybe didn't have my best interest in mind, which is unfortunate, but we encounter those kinds of people too.
Yeah, it happens. And I think, boundary setting, I think in particular for women, has been something that has been a challenge because when we were raised, we didn't necessarily get taught how to have strong, safe boundaries for ourselves. And, many of us now that are entrepreneurs or working in business, we've learned that if we don't have those boundaries, then we can get, rolled over like with a Mack truck. And
Right.
so it just is more positive to learn that as a skill.
Yes. And to be able to identify who you let in and who you don't, and, navigating relationships along the way too.
Yeah, I always say protect your energy.
Yes. Very good.
Regarding your author journey as an author, did you have any aha moments, and what were some of the big takeaways that you had from going through this whole process as a
Sure.
brand new author?
I do love that I got to do it on my timeline, which was interesting to have that kind of control. I, like other people, work well with a deadline, but I had the opportunity to craft those on my own. I was working full time. I had all kinds of things going on. I had a big team I was leading at the time. And I kept reminding myself that this was supposed to be fun. Yes, it's work, but it's something you chose to do. You've always wanted to write a book. I always said I didn't have enough content. And finally, somebody asked me, well, what's enough content? And I really had no good answer. And then as we went along, I had too much content, and the workbooks had to turn into two books. And it's just an interesting piece in that. I think the other part of it, kind of the journey side of it, is really understanding. And I used to do a lot of programming on the art and science of leadership, and the art being the more human side of things, the creativity, the innovation, and then the science part being more the policy, procedure, structure, which is where I lived a lot. But I found out that, contrary to what I've been told all my life, that I did have a creative side. And this really gave me an opportunity to uncover more of that.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point about the timeline, because I say this to every one of my clients, that we're not on my timeline, we're on your timeline. So because that gives them the ability to, especially in the writing process, sometimes you have to actually really kind of integrate what it is you're writing and say, does that fit? Is that really what I want to say? And so that timeline doesn't always go as quick as most people would like it to.
Sure.
And this is another reason why we never set a launch date until we are right there at the end. And we know that all the systems are working together, they're talking to each other the right way, that we have copies of the book, because there are so many things that can happen that can delay a book launch, and even just life events, people who,
Absolutely.
take a vacation, get married, have a death in the family, have a child. Like, there's so many things that can happen in that timeline of, anywhere from 6 to 12 months of
Right.
writing and publishing a book, let alone turning it into two workbooks,
Sure.
that you just never know how it's going to work. So I think that's a very good point.
Well, and I really like it did have some structure to it. There was 48 animals. I wrote them in 12 animal chunks, kind of, and then I didn't really want them to be in that order, because then, as you wrote things in a certain time period, you wrote with a certain mindset and creative perspective. And then they all sort of sound the same, not really, but to some extent, same voice anyway. So mixing them up was a better thing. And then, of course, there was always my tendency to go back to the structure. When you said we have too much, we're going to have to do two books, I'll just divide them into two books. I was like, oh no, there has to be some order and reason and why. And so I tell that story a lot when I'm doing the workshops, because, it's okay for me to say, I want there to be a reason that these things are here. That had more meaning that way to me. It wasn't just, oh, here's 24 animals and here's or 24 animals, no, that's like, let's put them on the land and let's let them be together in the sea and the sky. And then it's fun because there is actually an animal in each of the books that could be in the other book. And that lends itself to some really great conversation. How do you see this? Where do you feel it fits? And why? And so even some of those things that could be viewed as, I don't want to say mistakes, but the errors maybe, they're not. It's intentional and it's worked out well for it.
Yeah. And I should just, let our listeners know that the books have colorable images for each one of the animals. And then the workbook part of the that animal is really what leadership trait do they display. And then it gives you some ability to journal and go be introspective as far as, do I portray that leadership trait in my organization? And so I love this, because while you're thinking about that leadership trait, you can be coloring the animals. It's just so cool.
It does. Really, and it is that, like, don't just sit down and try to complete the journal page, because, most of the time, if you force yourself to fill in the blanks, you're either going to put down the very first thing that comes to mind, or you're going to force something to fit in there because you think this is how you're supposed to answer it. And if you take the time just to sit and color and stop thinking about what was right in front of you or what you were doing previously or who you were interacting with most recently, and just color and think and allow yourself sort of that space, you come back to it with a really different and open mind in how you might answer those questions. You see it differently. And it's
Yes.
hard for people. It's not, sure, you can do it the other way. However, I've seen it be more effective using the coloring page as an escape, if you will.
Yes. Well, there is something about the ability to change the synapses of the brain. The brain works differently when you're doing something creative like coloring or painting or even just writing by hand. Your brain works differently than reading something on the computer screen. This is also why, for example, when we order proofs for the book, I'm like, you need to look at the book and read the physical book, because what you see on the page is different than what you see on the screen,
Sure.
because we're human and our brains work differently that way.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting that when you incorporate that aspect into the workshops, people come away with probably a deeper, more meaningful experience.
I do think so. When we have time, when the workshop is the duration that allows for actual coloring, not just this is how you use the book and you take it away and I cross my fingers that you use it the way it was intended to be used. You do get more out of it when you actually take the time to color.
I think it's so cool. It's
Yeah,
just so
it's
much
fun.
fun.
Yes.
So you've received some amazing feedback,
Yeah.
and your career has actually shifted somewhat too. What are some of those results that you'd like to share since you've published the workbooks?
You know, it just continues to evolve. It's fascinating how the path that it's taken, it's opened doors I didn't even know existed. I was asked to be a TEDx billing speaker this year, and I did a whole piece titled Wildly Effective Leadership. And it's about being intentional as a human leader, however, being open to and observing the world around you and learning from the animals. Some of the content that I used in the talk was a little bit different than what's in the books, but it's really based around the same things. And I've watched organizations and individuals use the books in ways that started some really great team conversations. I use the books in executive coaching, kind of one-on-one. We've built some individual development plans around it. It's about, using them with young leaders to identify who you are now, what kind of leader do you want to be, what are those things that, again, you have to be intentional about developing because they're not natural strengths just inherently. And, we talk about the animals and their traits in what I would consider very observational terms. It's not meant to be highly scientific. In fact, I learned early on to ask in groups if I had any animal experts in the room, because if there are, they either need to lean in and help support the concepts that I have, or they might have to put what they know away or aside because maybe it's not really true about the animal. It's just the way we humans have characterized or the animal and the way that they exist. And so that came from working with a team from the zoo and having a curator say, well, did you know that owls aren't really very wise because they have small brains? And then she started on this whole thing, and I was like, whoa, 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 wait a second. Like, but we say the wise owl, like we use that together. And so it's really been fun for me to talk to people, learn how they see the animals, because based on your culture, based on your own experiences, based on your knowledge, you might see the animal differently than I do. And that just adds to the opportunity to have conversations and learn from one another. A lot of people will say, for example, that horses are a very, trusted and empathetic animal. However, if you had a really negative experience with a horse when you were younger and you got thrown off, you might say, no, they're not to be trusted, right? And so then we can kind of talk about why that is and how you see it versus how I see it. And I give people that permission, if you will, to think differently about it because it's their animal story and it's the way they see it, not just how I see it.
Yes. And it's funny, I did get kicked by a horse when I was younger.
Oh, see? Yeah, probably doesn't feel
And it
very
hurt.
good.
But you know what? I wasn't mad at the horse. I knew that I walked behind the horse too closely, and so I deserved it.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
No, but people have used these in conflict resolution. We talk about different ways to communicate. The way you share the same message with a sea turtle might not be the same way that you share that message with a cheetah, for example.
Yes.
Or, in regular workplace scenarios, when you have somebody who is maybe not performing well, understanding their typical or traditional traits, what they value, really can help shape how you have that conversation with somebody. They're
Absolutely.
typically a really highly efficient worker, and they're not. You recognize that in them, and you can have a conversation about it. If they're typically very, calm and go with the flow, and all of a sudden you just don't see that, you can start to have that conversation. So, understanding yourself, understanding your team is really where we start.
Yeah, I think that's the way that we reconnect as humans is,
Mm,
we are taught to, embrace nature. When we are doing grounding exercises, we're taught to go out into nature, bare feet in the grass, go hug a tree, go listen to the birds. And when
yes.
we reconnect with nature, that really resets our nervous system as well. And I think that doing these exercises and in particular talking about the traits of those animals or the symbolic traits of those
Yes.
animals really does help us have that reconnection with nature, because that's something that we are so lacking in today's world of
Mm.
everything is technology, right? So I love that because it really kind of it boils it down to being very, very simple,
It
just to
does. And
make it
yep.
easy for people to understand.
Yep, I found lots of different ways to incorporate the animals. A lot of times I'll have people pick a card off a table, and then when they do their introduction, they need to also include, why they chose that animal. And undoubtedly, they tell a story. They
Mhm.
tell you about a time that I was at the zoo with my grandma and we saw this, or, my grandpa used to take me fishing and we would always see these kinds of birds on the lake, or when I was little, I had a pet this. There's something, and sometimes people will say, I picked it because it was cute. Perfectly fine,
Yes,
because sometimes that's just what you're drawn to, right?
hmm,
So it really gets people to start thinking about the animals, how they connect to nature, just as you described. And if you asked people to, tell you about the animal in a different, like just in a very logical, direct way, most of the time that's not going to come out. But when you invite them to tell a story around that, then it comes and you listen for it and you can find, oh, you just described this animal does do this. Now where would we put that in the workplace? How can we use that? What can we learn from that animal?
exactly. I love
Mhm.
that. And honestly, we are all animals. We are part of the greater animal kingdom anyway.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
why shouldn't we identify with these animals and say, okay, how is a beaver successful at building a dam? What traits do they have to build a good dam to survive? It's
Yep.
going back to the simplicity of nature and how it works. And if we can incorporate that into our own lives, I think it is brilliant.
Yep. And how they show up every day as their authentic self. They have to in order to survive and thrive. As a polar bear can't decide that today it would really prefer to lead like a butterfly. It just can't do that. But if you typically show up in the workplace with the strength, courage, and patience of a polar bear, but this situation calls for more of a delicate influence, some transformational leadership, you might be able to leverage the strengths of a butterfly, or you recognize that you aren't the most patient person and you can work on that. Now, are you going to ever be as patient as the person who is that naturally? Maybe not, but you're going to be more patient than if you never tried to work on it. So, it even relates to the workplace, the physical space in which you live or which you work. We talk about if you have a workplace that's designed for fast moving, highly efficient, speedy, safari animals, but you have this patient collaborative penguin in your midst. How long is that penguin going to work there? How long do they
Mm.
feel like they belong? Probably not. And so, what can you do in order to adapt your policies and systems to better welcome that penguin and make them feel like they belong? And then they can be
Mm.
much more of a highly effective employee.
Yeah. Now, I also know that you come from a spiritual or faith-based background.
Yeah.
Did you have any spiritual experiences that you
Mm.
can attribute to publishing your book?
You know what? I think that a couple of times that happened for me. I think anytime you put yourself out there and you open yourself up to, being in a place of truth, a place of service, and you naturally tap into something bigger than yourself. And you already said about, people being out in nature and reconnecting. Part of it didn't really feel like writing. It was more like I was remembering.
Mm.
There are animals in there that I intentionally placed based on things my grandfather taught me. He was a bird person, so there's some birds in there. And, I love talking about the cowbird and how it's, such an opportunistic bird, right? We think it's not such a great creature, but wow, look at what it does, right? And I would not have known that if it weren't for him. I grew up in Wisconsin, so there are Wisconsin animals in the book, everything from the badger to the northern pike, which is again a nod on the other side of my family to spending time fishing. And some of those animals I wrote about while being in that space and going out on the water with my brother and just really you kind of forget that your own stories along the way. And this
Mm.
gave me an opportunity to remember those my children when they were little and how they loved the African wild dogs at the Denver Zoo. It's just people will say, why did you pick that animal? Well, let me tell you the story, and
Right.
really that opening up and sharing that part of me was hard for me because that's not something that I typically do. However, the books and these animals have opened that door for me as well.
Mm, that's beautiful. You also seem to use your intuition a lot,
Mm.
especially when it came to writing these workbooks and choosing the animals. But when was the time when maybe you listened to your intuition and it served you well, or if you didn't and you kind of like knew, oh, I should have listened to my intuition.
Yeah, that's interesting. I try to do that more and more. That's a practice I've been working on. And I think that every time I tried to force something
Mm.
or use someone else's approach, as much as I appreciated other people's input and ideas, it just didn't really feel like it worked. And when I just trusted myself and created my own rhythm, I think that's really um, when the books came alive, if you will. And I felt it was important to speak up for what mattered to me in terms of the structure and my idea on what the covers could look like, but also, just trusting my gut with that, knowing that I had people there who who wanted things to be successful too, and so
Mhm.
it is interesting when something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And when
Right.
something feels right, it typically is.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think that whole trusting your gut and using your intuition is a skill that, again, it's not something we're taught. We have to learn how to embrace that and how to utilize that. And it comes into play just not just in your everyday life, but it comes into play when you're working with other people, when you're creating and developing teams, when you're trying to create a cohesive way of moving forward, particularly if it's a project or something like that. So,
Right.
you've got to be able to listen to that, listen to your gut, trust your
Yeah.
instinct.
Well, there's only so much. I mean, strategy is amazing and can get you pretty far, but it's energy and alignment and listening to the cues around you that really help you to be successful in whatever it is you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, and as I love to pull cards. So
Yes.
what do you say
Yeah.
we pull some cards?
Sure.
It's going to be interesting to see if any of the animals come up on the cards
Oh,
today,
yes.
because these cards do have animals on them.
Okay.
And is there a question or something that you would like to ask that you think our
Hmm.
listeners would have an interest in?
Gosh, Susie, that's a great question. Oh, what question would I like to ask? Now, I often get asked, like, are you going to do more books? And I I don't know the answer to that necessarily. I don't think I'm done using the ones that I have. I keep finding new ways to use them. But maybe is there a leadership trait or a characteristic, something that I'm not utilizing to its fullest? Something that I'm ignoring that maybe I could lean a little bit more into or learn a little bit more about.
So weird that you just said that too. Let's just see what the cards say. But what I heard very distinctly when you were saying that was, can you use the animals to create like an AI type cartoon movie that could be shown in schools for children? I'm
Okay.
like, what?
Well, we
Yeah,
see, yeah, there are animated movies out there that
exactly. I was like,
use
oh,
animals in
this
all
it,
kinds of spaces.
and what came like the vision, because I also get visions when I channel.
Yeah.
The vision that came to me was something along the lines of Madagascar.
Oh, sure.
You know
Yeah.
how each one
Yep.
of those animals has a very distinct personality and
They
traits
do.
about them. And so I'm like, okay, I think that you may be doing a movie
Oh my gosh.
or
I
some
love
kind of
that. I love
learning
that.
thing or something. Okay.
Yeah.
Wild. Oh, that's weird. So the first card out is a 17 card, which 1 + 7 is an 8. And 8 is the number of communication, which was what we're talking about. We're talking about
Yep.
communicating ideas and leadership. And the card is the fates. And so this is saying it's fated and destined for you to take this whole idea of the workbooks and turn them into something more and multi-purpose them in different
Hmm.
ways so that they can be exposed to a variety of age groups and children, things like that.
Oh,
And you
sure.
can see like this figure here, she's looking and she's following the stars. The stars represents our guides, our loved ones, our passed on ancestors that drop us breadcrumbs along the way, on our path. And it's saying, follow the nudges, the intuition, right?
Yeah.
Follow those nudges because they're going to take you into something really interesting. And my left ear is like almost echoing in my left ear. That's very interesting. Okay. Next card is a 35. So 3 + 5 is another 8. So now I have 2 8s. So 8, 8, which is a master number. And this card is Loyal Heart. And on the card are 2 owls. We talked about owls,
Yep.
and they are looking at each other. So it's saying, the loyal heart is really, trusting your own heart, trusting yourself to do the right thing. And both of the owls are wearing crowns on their head. So that's really talking about tapping into your intuition, your higher self, your wisdom and knowledge. But I love this because, for me, owls are about wisdom. It's been a symbolic creature for wisdom in many, many different cultures. And I believe that in the Native American culture, owls also represent wisdom too, wisdom or knowledge. And then our last card is a 51 card. So that reduces to a 6. 6 is the number of love. So it's the vibration of love and relationship. And this card is milk and honey. And it's interesting because there's an
Hmm.
elephant playing in a little milk and honey bath. And this card always reminds me of the Wizard of Oz because of the blue gingham tablecloth and the
Yep.
rainbow. And it's again, but blue is also throat chakra. That is communication. What do we
Mm.
do when we have a sore throat? We use honey, right? So to soothe
Okay.
ourselves and to be able to clarify our voice. So I really love these 3 cards because it's really talking about keep doing what you're doing and move forward, because I feel like you are going to be embarking on a new journey with something in, you know, along the lines of some kind of video instruction or something to that
Yeah.
that effect. So
Wow.
wow.
That sounds pretty fun.
Wow, fun, fun, fun.
Yes. And it's funny that, as complicated as I thought the process would be, um, there were steps, there were bumps. It was challenging. I will always be grateful for, our friend Dave who came to me and said, "Wouldn't it be cool if?" And I said, "Oh, it really would be." And then he said, "And you should do it." And I was like, "Why me?" He's like, "Because this will be for you. You're the one who should do this." And I said, "I don't know how." And he said, "I will help you." And at that point, I was like, "I don't really know you that well. And why would you want to help me? Like, and why should I accept your help?" And, fast forward 3 years later from the time that the idea came out. And, Dave is a very important person in my life. He's been a great mentor and friend. And I never imagined that he would be able to give up, if I will, the idea of how he saw this coming together to allow me to take it and make it my own. And as he sat in the audience during my TEDx talk afterwards, I mean, I was thrilled that he was able to be there. And later he said, and that's why, because,
Yeah.
that's why this was for you. This is yours. You've taken it to a whole place that I could never have imagined. And that was really, really special for me.
That's the greatest gift, right?
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is. It's
Yep.
amazing. Yeah. So, Jennifer, what are the types of people and organizations that you work with, and how can people find you?
I have a consulting company that is currently called Jennifer Reiser Consulting. LinkedIn is a really great way to find me. I also have a website, riseupleadershipsolutions.com. And I work with individuals, I work with teams, I worked with a lot of nonprofits and their boards and their volunteers. This content, I think one of the most amazing things about it is it can be used by such a wide variety of people. I've used it with seasoned leaders, we've used it for succession planning, we've used it for conflict resolution, communication, individual development plans. I've used it with young leaders who are learning more about themselves. I've used it for administrative people in dental care. I've used it for sales and marketing professionals and hotel and hospitality. It just has such a wide reach because the animals are so universal. People see
Mm,
them. It's, in the forest, in the field, in your own backyard, there's these lessons that all we have to do is watch for them. And we, can customize the content so that it matches either the core values of the organization or the values or leadership traits of the individual, where your strengths lie. We use it for identifying some things that you want to work on. And oftentimes, people will say, well, what animal am I? It's not about that. There's not a test you can take. There's not, what I encourage people to do is make a list of,
mm,
3 to 5, 5 to 7 strengths you feel that you have. And then we look for those words in the way that we've described the animals. And sometimes we have to use synonyms because it's not necessarily a caring animal, but there's certainly an empathetic animal. And how do they use it? And what is their sister trait? Because sometimes you'll see adaptability in multiple forms. It shows up differently in different animals.
mhm.
Collaboration and teamwork shows up differently for a honeybee than it does an otter. And so we have these conversations around that. You say you're a collaborative leader. However, what's the other trait that comes along with that? And people will say, well, how can you be a fox and a raccoon and a peacock all at the same time? Well, you're not all of those things all of the time. You just leverage the strengths in different situations or in different company.
Yeah. I love that. That is so well said, I have to say. Do you have any words of wisdom if somebody is really thinking about, I'm thinking about doing a book like this, or I want to publish a book, or what are some words of wisdom that you could give to somebody who's going to embark on this journey?
I would say surround yourself with encouragers,
Mm,
with people who get your vision and are willing to contribute to it, but aren't interested in diluting your voice.
right.
And really, I've also learned that, the publishing or the release of the books wasn't a finish line. It was
Mm,
really a starting point.
yeah.
And when the very first workshop that I did, somebody said, well, how do you feel? And I said, it worked. Like they worked the way that we thought that they would. They were, I always wanted to write the curriculum and have somebody else deliver it. But now I get to write it and I get to share it. And that has been something that I didn't anticipate working as well as it did. And
Yeah.
so it's just about starting.
Yeah.
Your thoughts and ideas don't do anybody else any good, sitting in your head or in a notebook on your shelf. It's getting them out there and allowing somebody who knows the process and can help guide you through that to letting them in to help you be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it's okay to dream big. like I can remember when we were probably about 3/4 of the way finished. And I said, I think you need to approach the zoos. And you were like, what? I was like, no, seriously, think about it. They have gift shops, and I could see your workbooks in these gift shops. And you ended up doing a whole, what was it, several days of coaching for them?
Yeah. Oh, yes. The local zoo here has been an amazing partner. And I put some of the Zoo Montana animals in the books on purpose. One, because it's a great place to teach, and it's become a great venue for me. And you can send people out to observe the animals in real life rather than on TV or on a phone or on a screen. And then we've developed a whole wildly effective leadership program for their up and coming leaders, for their executive team. They've just been really great partners. And I think that I didn't realize until I started doing this how much I really enjoy zoos and being in that space, particularly those who are interested in the education and the not just of course the care and keeping of the animals, however, also the education side of it, the support that can be nurtured in that. So how do we bring the people together around something, help to see that and share that? So
Awesome.
It's been pretty great.
It's amazing. Yeah, like you were one of my proudest success stories.
Wow, thank you.
Because I'm like, look what she did. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. You are right. It's very, very fun. And that's part of it. I mean, I love to learn. I always want to do better. I didn't realize how important it was to make it fun for people in order to do that. And to take the concepts and turn them into real, like usable, functional things in your organization is so important as well. So it's been great,
So what's next for you?
Well, that's really interesting because I've been thinking through that a lot. I'm not really sure. I'm open to ideas, I think, which is a really great place to be in as I've been kind of wrapping up this calendar year. For me, I have some time carved out to go back and reflect on the quantity of people that I worked with, the kinds of people that I worked with, just thinking about the impact. For me, it was never about, millions of people. It's more about one here and one there, and how they become better versions of themselves by using these workbooks, by sitting in those workshops, by better understanding who they are and what they bring to the team, and then also how they can take the time to learn about those on the team and how they can work well together. It's been a constant evolution, which is really great. And I'm very excited to see what comes next. So, do I know? Not exactly. Will I figure it out? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And if any of you out there listening would like Jennifer to come and teach a workshop and include her amazing activity books, please reach out to her at jenniferreiserconsulting.com, because I swear that you would not regret having her come and work with your team.
Thank you, Susie.
Thanks
Appreciate that.
And thanks for being here today, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks for letting me tell my story.
My pleasure. If you found this interesting, I encourage you to join me for the next episode, and be sure to subscribe. Every week, one lucky listener who subscribes and posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will be entered into a drawing for the grand prize, a private VIP day with me, valued at $25,000. So be sure to subscribe and post a review. Until then, keep on writing so you can finish the damn book. We'll see you next time.
So that's it for today's episode of Finish the Damn Book. Head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will win a chance in the grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 value private VIP day with Susie Schaefer herself. Head on over to finishthedamnbookpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Susie's gift. And join us on the next episode.